At dawn, the church bell rang, though no one pulled the rope. Smoke still hung in the air. The Crow-Eye gang was gone, wiped out in a single blast. So was the stranger who stopped them. But there he stood, dust-covered, silent, alive. He didn't remember his name, didn't remember Red Hollow, but a rancher did. "That's John Ezra Cain," he said, pale. "He disappeared 10 years ago after 20 men swung in El Paso." Cain said nothing, just stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a warning. Because a man who gives everything and returns with nothing, he's not just a mystery. He's a storm waiting to happen. John Ezra Cain rode into Red Hollow as the sun fell behind the hills, alone, silent, carrying nothing but dust and judgment. The town was cracking at the seams. Fear seeped into every window, every boarded door. The Crow-Eye gang was closing in, 25 men, armed and merciless. Law had vanished. Hope had followed. And then, Cain. He said nothing. He didn't ask who needed saving. He simply rode to the center of town, tied his horse, and walked into the saloon like he'd done it 100 times before. Moments later, 7 outlaws followed, guns drawn, eyes wild. They didn't leave. 7 shots, 7 bodies. Cain didn't even finish his drink. That night, the gang returned in full force, ready to burn Red Hollow to the ground. Cain didn't run. He faced them, alone. With steady hands, he lit the fuse to the dynamite rigged behind the saloon. The blast shook the desert. When dawn came, the town stood. Cain did not. But as the sky lit gold and the church bell rang, he returned. Standing at the chapel steps, no wounds, no memory, not even a name. "I don't know who I am," he said. Then someone whispered what no one dared say aloud. "John Ezra Cain. He disappeared 10 years ago, after 20 men were sent to the gallows in El Paso." Cain looked down at his hands, and the town held its breath. A man had given everything to save them, and somehow he had returned without himself. The day before the sky turned black over Red Hollow, people were already counting hours they didn't think they had. The Crow-Eye gang had crossed the border from the north with the same precision as a storm front. No warning, no demands, just blood and boot tracks. They'd hit 4 towns in 3 weeks, left 1 sheriff nailed to a courthouse door and another sewn into his own saddle. Red Hollow was next. Everyone knew it. No one said it out loud. People boarded windows, buried family heirlooms under floorboards. The schoolhouse closed. The preacher left town. By midday, riders were spotted on the ridge, 25 in all, black coats, dust masks, eyes like rusted knives. And then the wind changed. At first, no one noticed the lone rider coming in from the south. He moved like a shadow across the horizon, unhurried, upright, as if the whole world had time to wait. By the time he passed the chapel, the air felt different. Not cold, not warm, just still. The man said nothing. He dismounted without a sound, tied his horse near the well, and walked straight down the center of Main Street. Dust parted around his boots. He wore a long coat stitched at the shoulders, heavy from travel. 2 revolvers rested on his hips. His stride was steady, like the rhythm of a clock no one had wound in years. People peeked from behind curtains. Whispers trailed him. Who is he? What fool rides into town when everyone else is praying to leave it? But no one stepped in his way. At the saloon, he stopped, looked once at the faded sign above the door, then stepped inside. The room quieted the second his boots hit the floor. Poker chips froze midair. The bartender didn't ask what he wanted. He just poured whiskey and stepped back. Cain drank slow, eyes forward. He didn't sit. He didn't blink. Moments later, the saloon doors creaked again. 7 riders from the Crow-Eye gang strode in, tracking blood and mud behind them. They saw Cain, laughed. One reached for his gun. 7 shots rang out like a single strike of thunder. When the smoke cleared, 7 men lay broken. The room never heard Cain draw. He set the glass down, tipped his head to the bartender, and walked out. No words, no war cry, just action. Word spread through Red Hollow like wildfire in dry brush. The man who had come from nowhere had done what no sheriff dared, stood against the gang, and won. That night, the rest of the gang rode in, 20 bodies on horseback, furious, looking for retribution. Cain was waiting. He stood at the edge of town, beside the mining shed, where he had spent hours rigging the last of the town's dynamite. When they charged, he didn't move. He lit the fuse with a match he struck on his own boot. The ground split open. Fire painted the sky. The roar of the blast echoed into the hills like the voice of something ancient. When the dust settled, the gang was gone. So was Cain. No one found remains. No coat, no boots, no trace. They held a vigil the next morning. Candles on windowsills, flowers on the steps of the saloon, until the church bell rang. No one had pulled the rope. He stood there, John Ezra Cain, whole, unburned, alive. He didn't remember where he had been, didn't know what had happened. He didn't even remember his name. A deputy asked cautiously, "Sir, who are you?" Cain looked at him, calm. "I don't know." The silence that followed felt heavier than the explosion. That's when the old rancher stepped forward, face pale, hands shaking. "I know him," he rasped. "John Ezra Cain, 10 years ago in El Paso. 20 men hung from the gallows by dawn." Cain vanished after that. No one spoke. No one breathed. Cain didn't deny it, didn't flinch, just looked down at his palms like the answer might be carved into his skin. People began to retreat. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared. The man who had given everything to save Red Hollow had returned with nothing, not even a memory of who he was. But his presence wasn't hollow. It carried weight, like gravity shifting. Children stopped playing. Dogs wouldn't bark near him. Clocks ticked slower when he passed. Still, no one turned him away. Whether it was gratitude, fear, or awe, they let him stay. Cain didn't ask for shelter, didn't speak unless spoken to. He spent hours standing by the well, watching the horizon, listening. And though the town was saved, something about it no longer felt safe. They didn't talk about it, but every person in Red Hollow felt the same thing. The danger hadn't ended. It had only changed shape, and it wore the face of the man who'd stood in fire and somehow walked out whole. Red Hollow was safe, but peace sat wrong on its skin. John Ezra Cain walked the streets like a shadow that didn't know where to fall. He spoke little, slept rarely, and watched the sky too often, as if waiting for it to change color. At first, people treated him like a savior. Women brought food. Children followed him at a distance. Men nodded in respect, but didn't linger. That changed quickly. The first sign came at the clock tower. At exactly midnight, it stopped, just froze. The hands never moved again. Every repair failed, even replacements cracked. The second sign came with the guns. Rifles misfired, 6 shooters jammed, ammunition aged overnight. Then the mirrors, reflections twisted. Some townsfolk claimed they saw Cain standing behind them even when he wasn't there. And always, he was calm, detached. Cain would wander to the church steps before dawn and sit there until light broke. Sometimes he prayed. More often, he just stared ahead, still like the world had paused and only he remained in motion. That's when the dreams began. He didn't speak of them, but the way he stared at his own hands told more than words could. He started tracing something on his skin, silent symbols, like memory trying to crawl its way back through his fingertips. In those dreams, he was someone else. Not the man who lit the fuse, not the man who saved Red Hollow, but something colder, something ancient. He stood on gallows, not as victim, as judge. Black robes, no face, only smoke. He'd tie the rope, give no sermon, and push. Every dream ended with a mirror. And in the mirror, he wasn't there, only something watching back. One morning after a night with no sleep, he caught his reflection in the church window and recoiled. Not from what he saw, from what he didn't. His eyes were empty, not blank, not blind, just gone. Later that day, an old man approached him outside the blacksmith's. "Cain?" the old man asked, though it wasn't a question. Cain nodded. "I've seen you before. Not here. Not like this." The man's voice was hoarse like old leather. "Antietam, you walked that battlefield. The bullets missed you. You stood among the fallen as if counting." Cain did not answer. "You lay there," the man whispered, "but I swear I saw you walk." Cain's hands were clenched, as if holding on to something long lost. Around town, the strange things grew stranger. Children began calling him Father, not in jest, not in confusion, but with conviction, like it had always been so. They had reached for his coat, touch his fingers, then smile like they remembered something he didn't. One boy said, "You used to sing to me when the world was ending." No one laughed. Cain began testing the edges of the town. He rode to the border, north, south, east. Every time the same thing happened. He would ride for hours, through canyons, dry rivers, and sun-bleached fields. And then, without warning, he'd find himself standing at the town well, no memory of turning around. Once, he marked a tree with his knife, rode away. When he returned, the same mark appeared on the well's wooden frame. He was never leaving. He wasn't free. He was held here. By what? Or by who? One night, the girl who lost her father in the explosion found him near the old mine. She raised a rifle, hands steady, eyes hollow. "You took him from me." Cain didn't move. "You left me with nothing." She aimed for his heart, but just before she pulled the trigger, her breath caught. She stared at him, then past him, and her face crumbled. "My father," she whispered, voice shaking. "He's behind you." Her knees buckled. The gun fell. She collapsed in tears. Cain turned. There was no one there, only dust. But the girl kept crying, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. That night, Cain stood in the center of town. The wind howled through the empty windows. Lanterns flickered. And every soul in Red Hollow knew, whatever he wasn't a man anymore. Maybe he never had been. He had crossed a line no one else could see and left something behind on the other side. Some said he was a spirit wearing borrowed skin. Others whispered he was punishment sent in flesh. But no one dared ask him, because deep down, they feared he didn't know either. And worse, they feared he might remember. It began with blood in the well. Thick, black-red, slow-moving. The water turned overnight. Bitter. Wrong. When the townsfolk pulled the first bucket up and smelled it, they thought it was rust. Then something else rose from it, something sweet and rotting. By noon, the well was sealed shut. The sky, once blue as broken glass, dulled into a sick shade of brass. The sun looked tired. The wind went still. Even the horses refused to step into the center of town. John Ezra Cain said nothing. He stood at the edge of the chapel steps, coat unmoving, staring into a distance that had stopped obeying space. That was the day the miner came running down from the hills, dirt on his face, hands shaking like dry leaves in wind. "I found it," he gasped. "I swear to God, I found his name." The man held up a scorched, half-burned Bible, torn at the spine. Inside, a single name written in dried blood. John Ezra Cain. Below the name, July 3rd, 1833. Red Hollow froze. The mayor turned pale. "That's not possible." The Bible didn't lie. The date didn't lie. That meant Cain had fallen once, 52 years ago. And now he stood here, whole. The mayor gathered the town council behind closed doors. What emerged from that meeting wasn't a plan. It was a confession. Red Hollow, he said to the townspeople, is not listed on any map. Never was. I've checked for years. County records, missing. Railroads, skip it. No tax, no census, nothing. He trembled as he continued. It exists, but not where it should. That was when the digging began. The church, its foundation, had always sat uneven, like it leaned towards something hidden. For decades, no one questioned why. Now they tore up the boards beneath the altar and found another church, buried in stone. Its walls were made of blackened brick, smooth as glass. No one could read the symbols carved into them, lines like scars, letters that bent the eye if stared at too long. At the far end, behind the collapsed altar, they found it. A painting, faded, massive, undeniable. Cain, crucified, arms spread, thorns across his brow, black tears streaked his cheeks. He wasn't being punished. He was being contained. Cain touched the wall. It pulsed beneath his fingers, like a heartbeat. He stepped back. No one spoke. That night, clocks stopped again. Every single one. Even pocket watches. Cain stood by the well, clutching something he hadn't touched in weeks, a silver timepiece. He turned the dial once, hesitated, and clicked it open. Time stopped, not metaphorically, literally. People froze mid-step, horses mid-gallop, leaves mid-fall. The world became a painting. Cain was the only one moving. For 3 minutes, he wandered through town, and for 3 minutes, the sky above him flickered, like someone pulling at the threads of a curtain too thin to hold. When time resumed, no one noticed, except the townsfolk had changed, slightly, subtly. They no longer blinked at the same time. Some walked with a limp they hadn't had. Voices spoke with unfamiliar rhythms, like something else was learning to talk through them. Then came the language. Children began whispering words no one taught them. Old words, dry as parchment, rhythms that stirred the air wrong. Cain heard it and froze. He remembered those words, not from this life, not even from the last, but from a time before memory. And then came the final blow. A little boy, barely 6, approached Cain near the edge of the well. His eyes glowed faintly, like embers behind thin glass. He took Cain's hand and said, soft and clear, "You're not a man." Cain didn't speak. "You're the lock. In this place, Bippo?" The boy smiled. "This is your prison." Cain's heart beat once, then paused. The boy let go, walked away. Cain stood alone under a sky that no longer looked human. He didn't sleep that night, didn't blink. He wandered to the church, into the room beneath, and stared at the painting of himself hanging from the black cross. A part of him began to remember. He wasn't born, he was made. Not by a mother, but by consequence. He had once judged the wicked, ended towns swallowed by rot, struck down men who believed themselves gods. He had done it again and again and again, until the world broke trying to stop him. They didn't kill him. They couldn't. So they buried him. In Red Hollow, a place outside maps, outside mercy, he was sealed with memory, chained with time. But then he sacrificed himself, and that was the flaw. Every time he gave himself to save others, he woke up stronger, closer, and this time he came back too complete, too whole. The gate creaked open, and the truth walked with him. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a man, he was the last thing the world ever wanted to see again. And now Red Hollow wasn't just remembering, it was becoming him. The rain came without clouds. It fell slow, heavy, thick as ink, soaking the desert floor. Red Hollow had seen storms before, but not like this. The drops stung skin, burned paint from signs, left the streets whispering with steam. And through that rain came the voice. It didn't speak from above. It echoed through the ground, from inside walls, beneath floorboards, behind mirrors. One word, again and again. Cain. John Ezra Cain stood in the middle of Main Street, soaked to the bone, unmoving. The voice knew him, called to him like a long-lost song he never meant to remember. People watched from behind shuttered windows, terrified. They knew something had broken. The sky hung lower now, as if gravity itself had bent under the weight of something ancient. Cain looked up. For the first time since he returned, he looked afraid. The townspeople changed first. Not all at once, not violently, quietly. A man's reflection blinked before he did. A woman's shadow walked ahead of her. Children began humming in strange tones. At night, some were found sleepwalking in circles, muttering words no one recognized. Until Cain did. They were the words from the walls of the buried church. Cain begged them to stop, but they didn't understand. Or perhaps they couldn't. The rain didn't wash away, it soaked into the ground. The color of the soil darkened. The wood of the building swelled. Everything groaned like the town was breathing. Then came the night screams. A woman gave birth to a child that never cried, never blinked, only stared. It didn't survive the night, but its presence lingered. Cain held it in his arms before they buried it, and something inside him cracked. Not rage, not confusion, sorrow. A sorrow that had nowhere left to go. He knew what he had brought, what had awakened, what had followed him in. And then, a man arrived from the wastes, cloaked, on foot. His coat was torn, his face streaked with ash, but his voice was clear. I am the gatekeeper, he said. And you, John Ezra Cain, were never meant to wake again. The townsfolk surrounded him. No one dared move. Cain stepped forward, face pale. Why now? He asked. Why me? The gatekeeper did not answer with mercy. You were sealed, buried in this place, not as punishment, as warning. Every time you sacrifice yourself, the lock weakens. Every act of salvation chips the stone. And now, he looked to the storm above. You've remembered too much. Cain fell to his knees. The memory came in full. He was not born from blood, nor love, nor hope. He was born from consequence, created to destroy evil, but forged in imbalance. For every act of judgment, he carried the echo of the sin he punished. And over time, that echo grew louder than the voice that made him. He had been sealed for the safety of the world. But Red Hollow had broken the seal. Not by accident, by need. The town had called out, and he had answered. But the price had followed. Red Hollow began to bleed from its seams. People melted into shapes not their own. Some grew horns, others wept smoke. Language broke, time unraveled. Birds flew backward, trees twisted toward the ground. The town's edges dissolved into mist. There were no roads out, no horizon. Red Hollow had become unmoored. It was no longer a place. It was a consequence. Cain walked through it all, coat dragging, heart hollow. He touched the well and it split open. Inside was not water. It was fire. He touched the buried church and it trembled. He knelt in the same spot where the painting of himself still hung, crucified in silence. And for the first time, he wept. Not from pain, from understanding. His life had never been his own. His purpose was never about redemption. It was containment, and he had failed. A girl found him there, the same girl who once tried to kill him. She sat beside him without speaking. He looked at her, voice barely human. I thought saving you would save me. She said nothing, just leaned her head on his shoulder, and Cain broke. The gatekeeper returned the next morning. This is the end, he said simply. Cain stood, worn, weathered, but steady. I can fix it, he said, one last time. The gatekeeper studied him. You've said that before. Cain nodded. But this time I won't come back. The gatekeeper didn't stop him. No one did. That night, Cain gathered the townsfolk. What was left of them? He stood before the church, eyes burning. Red Hollow gave me a second chance, he said, and I gave it my truth. That truth cost us all. People listened. Some cried. Others stood in silence. Cain opened his coat, revealed the same silver pocket watch he once used to stop time. This town exists because of me, but it doesn't belong in this world anymore. He turned the dial. Time paused, then reversed. For 1 second, people glimpsed what once was the town before fire, before loss, laughter, daylight, children playing, bells ringing. Cain smiled, then stepped into the well. He walked into the flame, and it accepted him. The town trembled, the sky cracked, and slowly, quietly, Red Hollow changed. Not disappeared, not saved, changed. Cain was gone, but the sacrifice remained, and sometimes when the rain falls without clouds, people still hear that voice in the wind. Not a curse, a promise. Let me carry it so you don't have to. They never found his body, only a pool of light, soft and golden, where the well once stood. The flame had gone cold. The earth had sealed itself. The storm had passed. But Red Hollow was not the same. When morning came, the town blinked into something different. The streets were paved. Telephone lines hung from metal poles that hadn't existed yesterday. The saloon now had glass windows. The chapel's steeple reached higher than before, but no one remembered building them. No one remembered yesterday at all. The townsfolk awoke with fragments, faces they couldn't name, voices that felt like dreams. Some called it rebirth. Others called it mercy. But deep down in the marrow of their bones, they all felt it. Something had been traded. John Ezra Cain was gone, and yet he wasn't. Children spoke his name without knowing why. A girl found a cowboy hat in the dirt behind the church. Old, worn, still warm from a head long vanished. She placed it on her head and smiled, then whispered words she'd never learned in a voice not her own. The preacher wept when he saw her, because in that moment he didn't see a child. He saw a torch being passed. Out by the ridge, at the edge where land once crumbled into fume, a new path had formed, and on it stood a rider. Tall, silent, the same stillness in his frame, but his face was not the same. Younger, older, neither, both. The shape of him was familiar, but the presence changed. He didn't look back at the town. He simply turned to the horizon and rode on. The map makers would later argue over the territory. Some said it didn't exist. Others said it moved. But every version of the map shared one thing in common: a sliver of land drawn in gray. No state, no country, no laws, just two words written in faded ink: the gray zone, no way out. And somewhere in that space, if you listen carefully, the wind still carries a voice. Not warning, not threat, but a promise. If the world needs me again, I'll come back. Sometimes the ones who carry the darkest weight are the ones who ask for nothing in return. Sometimes a man doesn't need to be remembered to be felt. John Ezra Cain never asked for glory, never sought redemption. He walked into fire again and again, not to be saved, but to save someone else. If that isn't grace, what is? If you felt something, share it. If you heard his footsteps in the silence, tell someone. Red Hollow lives on in the spaces we don't speak of, and so does he.